We're suited up, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to talk about a little bit more Last Epoch, and this time the multiplayer. I'm going to make one assumption, and that is that you read the article, or actually the articles, because there's 3 of them posted pretty much at the same time. There is the frequently asked questions, there's the roadmap update, and there's the actual multiplayer monthly update. I read all 3 of them, and this video is more about a discussion and some of the things I noticed, some of the things I realized, and I just wanted to share my thoughts with you. So it is not going over each and every individual piece out there. If you want all the information, I'm sure there are other YouTubers out there that cover the entire thing, maybe read through all 3 articles. That is not me. I'm going to just read out a few points. I got 6 points that I thought about, and I just wanted to share my thoughts. I think I will start with my personal opinion on multiplayer, and I've said this before in other videos, but to me multiplayer is quite irrelevant. Actually, I am not particularly excited for it. I will not really play too much multiplayer because I am very much a single player ARPG person. I never play multiplayer in like Grim Dawn, Path of Exile, Diablo even. Only previously in Diablo 2 with the, the Mephisto runs or something. You played those in a group, but that is about it. And Last Epoch doesn't really have boss runs, right? Because you have to go through the entire monolith first, which is a bit of a hassle. So I don't see personally any reason to play multiplayer unless it is with some people in the Discord. Then I'll gladly play it, right? But otherwise, I am not someone who does that a lot. And that's true for the large majority of players, right? Everybody is very vocal about multiplayer, and of course everybody who is interested in multiplayer is going to be vocal about it, because Last Epoch is one of the few games that really tends to take this seriously. But at the end of the day, not too many people simply play multiplayer. I think if it is 25% of the player base, I'm being very generous, right, by saying that. That doesn't mean that I don't care what happens to it. I really hope for all of the people that are interested in it that it's going to be good. I think Last Epoch will definitely have a decent implementation, and that brings me to my second point, which is talking a little bit about the overall progress of multiplayer. What is the impression that I'm getting? 11th Hour Games simply doesn't really put out half-baked products, which is a good practice, and there is no reason to believe that multiplayer is going to be bad in that sense, right? From that perspective. It's also good to read that they have made significant progress with multiplayer. A bunch of features already exist. I'm gonna go over a few of them because I think they're interesting. But it seems that the multiplayer is pretty far in already. They're doing daily testing, they're doing weekly testing on a Friday with the entire team. We read in the other post that the entire team is 50 people by now these days in EHG. And that brings me to point number 3. That's the question a little bit like, well, why are they putting so much time and effort into multiplayer? Because what I said before, that the majority of the player base doesn't really play multiplayer. It's hard to get numbers on these things in general, but out of just like my own experience, people I played with, people in the Discord, a lot of people just don't really play multiplayer in games like this. And I'm not considering trading multiplayer, right? Trading is just trading. I mean actually playing with other people and killing stuff, killing monsters, killing bosses, that sort of thing. You just don't see it that often. Path of Exile hardly ever has this, right? Hardly has crew play. You see some dedicated streamers doing it at the start of the league because it's very strong, but that's about it. I think other games, they don't really have it. This is not really a co-op kind of game, like for example Kill Squad is. Kill Squad is very much tailored around it. The Last Epoch, PoE, not so much. However, Last Epoch tries to make an effort. I think one of the reasons that EHG is interested in this still is that it is a distinguishing feature. It is a selling point for them, and they have quite a few people interested in it. There's always questions on the forums, always questions in the chat. So yeah, probably a good move, but it's not to be underestimated how much time and effort they're putting in. And I hope they're getting, let's say, rewarded for their efforts and that a lot of people are going to play multiplayer. And right now, I'm just not entirely sure that that's the case. I feel that much more than any other typical ARPG or similar ARPG out there, they're putting in a lot of time and effort to make multiplayer, co-op multiplayer a thing, but they're not really incentivizing people to play it. Meaning they're not giving you specific rewards, or maybe vanity items, or maybe cosmetic items, or pets you can unlock, or whatever. I got a small quote here which I want to read. This is from one of the articles. It says, "Because we don't want to lock the best loot behind content that requires a cooperative party and maintain that playing with groups is optional, albeit a lot of fun, we will not be adding content that requires parties to defeat." I am a little bit divided on this. I think it could be very interesting and fun and completely warranted if you put so much time and effort into this, that you do create some specific rewards. Clearly, they've said this so many times by now, they can't backtrack on this. But I don't think it would have been a bad idea to lock some content behind multiplayer, just to incentivize people to play it. Because I don't agree with the philosophy that all content should be accessible to everyone. I think that is one of the things that Path of Exile does very well, because it sort of inherently makes there is a strive to get better, right? There is this thing that you want to do or master in order to get better at the game and reach the higher level content. The fourth topic I wanted to get into and provide a bit of background and explanation maybe is server authority. And server authority basically means that the server is the authority and not you with the client, not your own PC on which you have installed Last Epoch. Right now you could say it is client authority. You could also argue right now there is no server because there's nothing online. If there is any server, it's your hard disk pretty much, right? Or your SSD on which you have installed the game. That is your server, but you're also your own client. The reason why server authority is so important is because it gives the developers control of their own online game. Because if every action from any player and any action in the world has to pass a single server, then you have a single point of truth. You have a single point where the reality is, let's say, created, which is in the server. That makes the server the authority. And then it is up to the server to synchronize that reality back to every client. Meaning that you see on screen what the server decides is the truth or is the game state. Because if you have a single point of truth and you control that point of truth because EHG controls this server, or at least to a large extent, right? That means that basically, largely at least, cheating will not be an option, which is of course good because we're going to be running around in a multiplayer competitive environment. There will be trading, there will be races, there will be leaderboards. You really don't want to give people the option to cheat or to duplicate items or duplicate gold or something like that. So that is one of the main reasons you implement something like this. And I'm saying this because there are also a lot of downsides to a system like this. At least 4. There's latency, because now you're interacting with the server. There's performance issues, potentially. There's downtime, meaning that the server will not always be online. And desync, meaning that your client gets out of sync with the server, resulting in a very extremely poor gaming experience, and you start seeing your character hopping all over the screen. It's quite terrible, and it usually starts happening when there is more stuff going on the screen. For single player, it's not really a problem. For multiplayer, it gets infinitely more complicated because now the single point of truth, the actual server, has to determine the truth for 4 clients, right? Because you're playing with 4 people, and calculate all of that, and at the same time relay the truth back to these clients. And they all need to be in sync as well. And it might sound easy on paper, but in reality this is extremely complex. you need very fast processing speeds, you need very good networking code, or netcode as they call it, and you need to make these processes extremely efficient. Because if you write, let's say, inefficient or simply bad code, and it takes, let's say, 100 milliseconds longer to calculate, for example, where everybody is on a map, that means that now everybody has 100 milliseconds lag. Which is why getting multiplayer right is so extremely complicated. And then I'm not even talking about all the other additional systems that are sort of in the periphery of the server and the client. Because the server is usually not a single server. I mean, you're communicating with a single server, but behind that server, there are all sorts of other servers and processes running, and storage and databases to keep the state of various things in there. And all of this combined means that setting up a multiplayer architecture, let's say, with game servers, clients, databases, authorization, you need to authorize the players as well, and then the synchronization and everything, it is actually extremely complicated. Which is also why basically for the last years anyone releasing a multiplayer game has messed it up somehow, because there is so much stuff going on. There are like 15-20 components, potentially even more, and that is excluding all the connectivity, and that's excluding all the actual writing of the code. And you have to only mess it up in one of these components, or in one of the lines of the code, or out of these processes needs to be inefficient, and basically the whole thing breaks down. Which is what you see time and time again. And this is why every game basically that I know of for the last year or 2 or 3 that I've been more intensely following all these games have messed it up, basically, right? Outriders, even a month later, there were still like items missing. It was a complete mess. The Path of Exile, Last League, someone forgot to migrate a bunch of characters, and the database field size was a little bit too large. And before you know it, the first 12 hours of the league were a complete disaster. Now, everybody is almost forgotten at this point in time, right? It's not the end of the world, for sure. Outriders was the end of the world. I mean, that's basically the end of the game. This is just to indicate that multiplayer environments and multiplayer architecture and everything that's going on in the IT over there is extremely complicated. And that is the reason why it fails. We'll get back to this in a little bit, but before we talk about the next part, let's talk a little bit about game balance. The devs are stating, and I find this rather interesting, that they feel that if you play in a well-organized group, the content will be a little bit easier, and if you play in a disorganized group, the content will be a little bit harder. I think this is true for, let's say, the casuals, like me. So if I would just play with a bunch of buddies and we make sort of, let's say, good agreements with each other, and we assign maybe some roles. Tanks and healers don't really exist, but you can sort of imagine, like, you can sort of come up with a game plan and efficiently move through the echoes and the monolith and play the game together. And then, you would be a little bit faster than otherwise. However, imagine that you put a group together with Foe, Boardman21, Lizard, and McFluffin. And you have probably Foe, Theorycraft 4 built. Do you really think it's only going to be slightly more powerful than if only either one of those 4 would play the game? Absolutely not, right? It's going to be completely broken. I guarantee it. There's going to be absolutely broken builds out there, broken groups. I can't wait, honestly, for the videos from Boardman of this. Like, this is gonna be millions and millions and millions of DPS, and the scaling of the monsters is going to be completely trivial. I think the content of the game is already completely trivialized by some of these players in single player, and in multiplayer it's gonna be multiplicatively worse, right? They're gonna be completely destroying the game, and I don't think any amount of balancing is going to counter that. Because this is an inherent issue with single player multiplayer. Multiplayer, if played right, is always so much stronger. You can't really balance against that without destroying the game for most people, which is why this usually remains the case. This has been the case in Path of Exile for years, and I don't think Last Epoch is going to be any different, despite what the devs are saying in their posts. And then the question is, maybe like, is that a bad thing? I don't really think that's a bad thing. I think most people won't notice, like I said. I think the casuals don't even notice. But for stuff like the economy, yeah, it might be a bad thing. But otherwise, you know, these guys are just so good at the game. They're gonna be the richest player on the servers anyway. There is no denying that. So I don't think it is necessarily a problem. You can't balance that out either way, no matter how hard you try. So I was laughing a little bit when I read like, yeah, it's only slightly more effective. Like, yeah, maybe for me, but definitely not for like the top end of players, right? They're gonna completely abuse this system. And then the last point, do I think the multiplayer launch or tests will be smooth? Now, first I'm gonna give you a small quote of Judd, the game director, and he says, "I cannot overstate how important it is to 11th hour games that multiplayer is executed correctly. A bad initial multiplayer experience can harm the game for all players and jeopardize the success and reputation of the studio long term, much more than holding it until it's ready. We want multiplayer to be enjoyable when we first release it without confusion or game-breaking bugs, even in early access. Several games with many more resources have failed to stick the landing on multiplayer, so we're making sure to learn from those mistakes and not repeat them. While we still may make some mistakes, we'll be able to react and iterate on them quickly." I think this is a very interesting quote for a few reasons. Clearly, Judd doesn't specify what he considers a good launch, and that's probably smart, right? Because he shouldn't be doing that. But I'm sure internally 11th Hour Games has a few metrics or has a sort of an idea on what they would consider a successful launch. And that idea may not be in line with what your idea is of a successful launch. In order for a game's reputation to be damaged long term, you need to pull, let's say, an Outriders, right? Pretty much nobody is taking that game seriously anymore because it took them a month and even longer to fix the game, and I'm still reading reports on items disappearing and whatnot, and legendaries not dropping correct. It's basically scuffed, completely scuffed, and that game will not recover from that. If you look at Path of Exile and the last league, which was pretty bad, right, in terms of PR, in terms of because they give the streamers priority in the queue, in terms of the launch, because the first 12 hours you couldn't really play. Did that really hurt the company in the long term? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. I mean, GGG is still the company to beat when it comes to ARPGs, and Path of Exile is still, despite all the hate it's been getting, also this time again with the nerfs, right? But it is still one of the most beloved games out there, with just a vocal minority being very critical about the game. If you compare these two situations, Outriders versus Path of Exile, I think that 11th Hour Games should actually be happy with a Path of Exile 3.14 launch scenario, where the first 12 hours or the first day is going to be a disaster, and then afterwards it's going to be relatively smooth. If they have higher hopes than that, I think it is rather unrealistic, because they have pretty much no experience. They may have developers with some experience. Apparently they got people from World of Warcraft and League of Legends, but or Battle.net and League of Legends. But that's only worth so much, because those guys haven't worked with these systems before, because the situation is so complicated in terms of like architecture and coding and connections and so many different processes going on. In order to deliver a smooth multiplayer experience, it is almost impossible to do it right the first time. Because if it was remotely possible, we wouldn't see so many games mess it up. Because do you really think that all of these other games are not noticing this happening around them time and time again, and are putting extra effort into a smooth launch. No, right? Everybody is doing this. However, the multiplayer architecture and IT and processes and everything around it has become so complex these days that launching a smooth multiplayer experience is pretty much impossible because nobody's doing it. So I'm really curious to see how this goes. I of course hope that it goes well. I think that if, you know, the first or maybe first 2 days it is not smooth or maybe not even playable, but after that it is completely fine and they solve out a few of the bugs and whatnot, and you can just enjoy multiplayer, I think that is completely fine and will not impact the company whatsoever. If the multiplayer more, let's say, long term has issues and you get more into the outrider scenario, right, with endless duplications, disconnects, I don't know, you can have all sorts of bullshit going on, right? Then I do agree with Judd. Then I think yes, this is actually going to hurt your game in the long run. So my prediction pretty much is a rocky launch, maybe 1 or 2 days of just issues, disconnects and whatnot. They'll probably figure it out relatively quickly because that is what they do. They are pretty good at troubleshooting. And then after 2 days, hopefully they got like the basics of the actual multiplayer down. It seems like they're doing a very good job on working that out and improving on the concepts. And then after a rocky launch, I would expect multiplayer to run decently well. I hope it does, basically for everybody who wants to play multiplayer really bad. I hope that you guys get the opportunity to play with your buddies and to have a lot of fun. I'll definitely check it out myself as well in the Discord, but otherwise it's not really a feature that I am super interested in. But that's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just want to thank you for watching. See you all soon. Bye bye.